The house in Malibu had always been a sanctuary for Steffy and Finn, a place where the sound of the waves once lulled them into peace after long days filled with chaos. But lately, the ocean felt different, louder, restless, as if mirroring the tension that had begun to crack the walls of their marriage. Since Luna's death, the air between them had changed. Grief had crept into the corners of every conversation, lingering between their silences, turning even the simplest words into landmines. For Finn, loss had awakened something dark and desperate. He told himself it was love, a need to heal what had been broken, but beneath that yearning lay obsession. He wanted another child with Steffy, needed one, as though a new life could fill the void Luna's absence had left inside him. At first, Steffy tried to understand. She knew the way trauma reshaped people, the way grief could drive a person to search for meaning in the most irrational ways. She listened as Finn spoke about how a baby could bring light back into their lives, how it could heal the family. But every time he said those words, she felt the weight of something unbearable pressing against her chest. She couldn't unsee the nights when Finn woke up screaming, Luna's name torn from his throat, or the mornings when he would stare at the ocean with an emptiness that frightened her. He was grieving not just the loss of a daughter, but the illusion of control. And now, that obsession for control had turned toward her body, her future. Steffy still carried her own scars. The death of Luna had reopened every wound she thought had healed, memories of danger, betrayal, the constant threat that had shadowed her family for years. She was finally learning to breathe again, to trust that the world outside their walls wasn't always waiting to destroy them. But Finn's relentless insistence that they try for another baby made her feel trapped once more, like her own healing didn't matter unless it fit into his plan. At night, when she lay awake beside him, she could feel his restlessness, the quiet tension of a man holding on to an idea because he was too terrified to face the silence it left behind. Their arguments began softly, then grew into something sharper, something neither of them recognized. "I just want us to feel whole again," Finn said one evening, his voice trembling with sincerity that only deepened the wound. "We're whole," Steffy replied, but the conviction in her tone faltered. He shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, we're broken. And the only way to fix it is to build again, to have something that's ours." She wanted to scream that they already had a family, that love wasn't measured by how many times you could start over. But the words never came out right. The more she tried to explain her fear, the more he took it as rejection. To the world outside, they still looked perfect. The glamorous doctor and the fearless forester, icons of strength and devotion. But inside the house, their marriage had become a battlefield of guilt and need. Steffy began spending more time at the forester offices, burying herself in designs and meetings just to avoid the unspoken tension that awaited her at home. Ridge noticed the fatigue in her eyes, the way she forced her smiles. "You look tired," he said gently one afternoon. "Maybe you should take some time off." She almost laughed at that. Time off from what? From being haunted? From trying to be everything for everyone? Instead, she told him she was fine, the word brittle as glass. Finn, meanwhile, threw himself deeper into his work at the hospital, surrounding himself with newborns and maternity cases, as if proximity to new life could drown the ache of loss. His colleagues whispered about how detached he had become, how he stared too long at ultrasound screens, his expression unreadable. When Steffy stopped answering his calls during the day, he began showing up unannounced at Forrester, pleading for her to talk to him. Each time, she grew colder, retreating behind the polished armor of a woman who had learned too well that vulnerability could be weaponized. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the ocean, Steffy finally broke. "I can't do this anymore, Finn," she said, her voice shaking. "You're not asking for a child. You're asking me to erase what we lost." For a moment, Finn said nothing. Then his face hardened with a pain so raw, it almost looked like anger. "You think I want to forget her?" he whispered. "I'm trying to remember her the only way I know how, by creating something good out of all this pain." His eyes filled with tears, but Steffy couldn't reach him. "That's not creation, Finn," she said softly. That's desperation. In the weeks that followed, their marriage began to crumble in quiet, devastating ways. Meals went uneaten. Conversations ended before they began. They moved around each other like strangers who still remembered the choreography of love but had forgotten the music. Finn's obsession deepened, and with it came a sense of isolation. He started keeping journals, notes about genetics, fertility timelines. Steffy found one accidentally, hidden beneath a medical file on his desk. Reading it felt like eavesdropping on a mind unraveling. The words were meticulous, clinical, and utterly devoid of her. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about him. Steffy turned to Taylor for guidance, her mother's voice steady, but laced with sorrow. He's grieving, sweetheart, Taylor said. But grief can make people cruel without realizing it. Steffy stared at her hands, twisting her wedding ring until her skin turned red. I love him, she said. But I'm starting to forget who I am when I'm with him. Taylor reached for her hand. Then you have to remind him. Or you have to walk away. But how could she? After everything they had survived, the shootings, the kidnappings, the endless battles with Sheila, walking away now felt like betrayal. Still, the breaking point came sooner than she expected. One night, after another argument that ended in tears, Finn showed her a file, a plan he had drawn up with a fertility specialist. I already scheduled the consultation, he said. We can just talk. That's all. But Steffy saw the manic gleam in his eyes, the way he had crossed the line between hope and obsession. You didn't ask me, she said quietly. You decided for me. His expression softened, but the damage was done. I just wanted to help, he said. You're helping yourself, she whispered. Not me. That night, she packed a bag. She didn't tell him where she was going, only that she needed space. He watched her leave without a word, the sound of the door closing echoing through the house like the final heartbeat of something once alive. In the days that followed, Finn fell into silence. He went to work, came home, and stared at the crib that still sat in the corner of their room, a relic of the life they once dreamed of. He replayed every argument in his mind, searching for the moment where love had turned into obsession. He told himself he only wanted to fix what was broken, but now he realized that in trying to heal his grief, he had wounded the one person who had stood by him through everything. Steffy stayed at the Forrester guest house, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city below. Every morning, she'd wake to the sound of seagulls and wonder if Finn was okay, if he was sleeping, if he still believed she would come back. And part of her wanted to. But another part, the part that had finally started breathing again, knew that coming back too soon would mean losing herself completely. Their families tried to intervene. Ridge and Taylor encouraged counseling, while Hope and Liam urged patience. But even they could see that this was no ordinary rift. It wasn't born from betrayal or anger. It was born from love twisted into something unrecognizable. When Steffy finally agreed to see Finn again, it was not at home but in Taylor's office, neutral ground for two people who no longer trusted the silence between them. He looked thinner, exhausted. She looked guarded but resolute. I'm sorry, he said first, his voice breaking. I didn't see what I was doing to you. I just thought if we had another baby, maybe it would stop hurting. She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. But you can't heal pain by creating more, she said. You have to live through it. We both do. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Finn reached across the table, his hand trembling. Do you still love me? He asked. She hesitated, then whispered, Yes. But I can't love you like this. The session ended with no promises, only an understanding that love alone wasn't enough to save them this time. Healing would take distance, humility, and time, 3 things neither of them had learned how to give before. In the months that followed, Finn threw himself into therapy, learning to face the grief he had buried beneath obsession. Steffy focused on rebuilding her sense of self, her career, her children, her identity apart from being a wife or a mother. Slowly, cautiously, the space between them began to shift from absence to understanding. One evening, months later, Steffy stood again on the balcony of the Malibu house. The ocean was calm this time, the air gentle. Behind her, Finn stepped outside, his footsteps hesitant but familiar. They didn't speak at first. Then he said, "I still want a future with you. But only when you're ready. When we're ready." She turned to face him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw not the man who had frightened her, but the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once promised her safety and had finally learned what that word truly meant. In that fragile moment, surrounded by the soft rhythm of the waves, they began to rebuild, not from obsession, not from loss, but from the quiet, difficult grace of two people learning how to live with grief without letting it define them. And somewhere between the moonlight and the sound of the sea, Steffi finally believed that healing, though slow and imperfect, was still possible. After that fragile reconciliation on the balcony, life between Steffi and Finn resumed in cautious, trembling steps. They both wanted to believe that forgiveness could silence the ghosts that lingered between them, but the reality was far more complicated. Healing is not a straight line. It loops and doubles back, reminding you of what you thought you'd already buried. For a while, things seemed almost normal. Steffi returned to her office at Forrester Creations, Finn to the hospital, both pretending that the air in their home no longer carried the echo of old arguments. Yet even peace, when built on denial, begins to crumble under its own weight. Every morning, Finn would watch Steffi from across the breakfast table, her eyes fixed on her phone as she skimmed messages from Ridge and Thomas about work. He wanted to ask her if she still thought about what they'd lost, if she still felt that emptiness when she looked at their children the way he did. But he didn't ask because he feared the answer. Instead, he smiled and kissed her forehead before leaving for work, telling himself that silence was better than confrontation. He was wrong. Silence only gave shape to the thoughts that haunted him. Finn's desire for another child hadn't disappeared. It had only gone dormant, like an ember waiting for air. Every baby born in the hospital reignited it. Every ultrasound image reminded him of what could have been. Sometimes he found himself pausing in the neonatal ward, staring at the tiny forms behind glass and imagining Luna's face, how she might have looked now if she had lived. The pain came sharp and sudden, like an old wound torn open. And always after the pain came the same idea whispering at the back of his mind. If we had another baby, maybe I could start breathing again. Steffi sensed the shift even before he said anything. The tenderness in his voice had turned to intensity, the way his gaze lingered too long when he saw her with their children. It frightened her, not because she doubted his love, but because she recognized the desperation behind it. Finn wasn't asking for family anymore. He was asking for salvation. One night, while folding laundry, she found a stack of papers tucked beneath one of his medical journals. It was a list: fertility specialists, treatment options, genetic screening labs. Her heart sank. The same ache that had once been compassion now felt like dread. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. "I thought we agreed to wait," she said quietly, holding up the papers. "We did," he answered, his voice calm but trembling. "But waiting isn't healing, Steffi. It's wasting time we might not have." She looked at him then, seeing not her husband but a man consumed by guilt, by the need to rewrite a past that would not change. "You think another child will fix this?" she asked. "You think it'll bring Luna back?" He closed his eyes, tears glistening beneath his lashes. "I think it'll bring me back." That confession broke something inside her. Steffi had always admired Finn's strength, his devotion, the way he carried light even into the darkest corners of her life. But now, that same light had turned into obsession, and she didn't know how to reach him through it. She turned to Taylor again, desperate for guidance. Her mother listened in silence before saying softly, "He's drowning, Steffi. And you can't save him by letting him pull you under." Those words echoed in Steffi's mind long after the session ended. The next weeks unfolded like slow decay. Finn became increasingly detached from reality, dividing his days between the hospital and an ever-growing collection of research files. He spoke less, but when he did, it was always about the same topic: the future, the child they could have, the life that might redeem all they had suffered. Steffi began avoiding him again, throwing herself into work until exhaustion became her refuge. Ridge noticed, but she deflected every question with a practiced smile. Even Thomas sensed something was wrong. "You don't look like you're sleeping," he told her one afternoon. "Is it Finn?" She only said, "It's everything." One night, Finn came home later than usual, his eyes bright with a feverish excitement. "I found something," he said, dropping a medical file onto the kitchen counter. "There's a new procedure. A way to ensure no genetic complications, no risks." Steffi stared at him, her voice low but trembling. "You're talking about creating a child in a lab like it's a science project." He shook his head. "It's not about science, it's about safety. About hope."
"Hope for you," she said.
"Not for me." They argued for hours, words turning into accusations, love twisting into resentment. "You think I don't care about what you've been through?" he shouted at one point. "You think you're the only one who's scared? I think you're using me to cure something that can't be cured," she cried. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Finn turned away, his shoulders shaking. "Then maybe you don't love me anymore." She stared at him, tears falling silently. "I love you too much to let you destroy yourself." After that night, she moved out again, this time without hesitation. Finn didn't stop her. He watched her go with the hollow eyes of a man who had finally realized what his obsession had cost him. The house felt empty, stripped of laughter, of warmth, of everything that had once made it a home. He spent his nights staring at old photographs, listening to recordings of Luna's heartbeat from her last ultrasound, punishing himself with memories. But grief, like love, changes shape. Weeks later, Finn collapsed at work from exhaustion. When he woke in the hospital bed, it was Steffi sitting beside him. She looked pale but composed. "You need help," she said quietly. "And you need to take it before there's nothing left of us." For the first time, he didn't argue. Something in him had finally broken open, not from anger but from surrender. "I thought I was saving us," he whispered. "I was just trying not to lose her again." She touched his hand gently. "You already did. But you don't have to lose yourself, too." With Taylor's guidance, they began couples therapy, this time not as lovers desperate to repair what was broken, but as two people learning how to survive the aftermath of obsession. The sessions were raw and painful, filled with tears and long silences. Finn confronted his guilt, the irrational belief that Luna's death was his fault, that if he had done something differently, she might still be alive. Steffi confronted her fear, the terror of being trapped again, of becoming a vessel for someone else's redemption. Slowly, painfully, they began to see each other not as adversaries, but as survivors. Months passed. There were relapses, moments when Finn slipped back into fixation, moments when Steffi wanted to run. But there were also moments of grace, a shared laugh, a quiet walk on the beach, a night spent watching their children sleep. Healing didn't come as forgiveness or forgetting. It came as understanding that love was not about fixing what was broken, but learning how to live with the cracks. One evening, as spring melted into summer, Finn took Steffi back to the spot where they had first watched the sunset together after Luna's death. The sky burned gold and violet, the waves whispering softly against the sand. "I used to think love meant never letting go," he said. "But maybe it means knowing when to hold on gently." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Maybe it means learning to breathe again without needing someone else to do it for you." They stood there for a long time, neither speaking, the ocean stretching before them like an endless promise. For the first time in a long while, Steffi didn't feel suffocated by what they had lost. She felt anchored by what remained, the fragile, imperfect bond between two people who had faced the worst of themselves and still found a way to stand. Their story was no longer about grief or obsession. It was about survival, the quiet kind that doesn't make headlines, the kind that unfolds slowly, one heartbeat at a time. And as the tide crept closer, washing away the footprints behind them, Steffi realized that maybe, just maybe, this was what healing finally looked like. Not perfection, not promises, but peace.